this is our last video on family systems. I know it's a long lecture and I'm sorry. So now we're going to talk about some non-traditional families. The main thing I want you to know about this topic is that the quality of care within the family is far more important than the makeup of the family. So same-sex parents. What are some of the effects? There is little to no evidence that children raised in same-sex households have any negative effects. 2, compatible parents provide advantages for children over single parents. The key word being compatible. Parents who fight all the time create more problems for children. Studies have focused primarily on 2 categories: general adjustment of children and whether or not the children of lesbian or gay parents are more likely to be lesbian or gay themselves. Psychological adjustment of children to same-sex parents is comparable to children of heterosexual parents. There is no significant differences in their development. A study by Richard Green in 1978 found that children raised by lesbians or transsexuals reported preferences for toys, clothing, and friends that were typical for their age and sex. So no difference. Another study by Green in 1986 looked at children raised by single mothers, 50 lesbians and 40 heterosexual. So all single, but some were lesbians and some were heterosexual. Boys from the 2 groups showed no significant difference in intelligence test scores, sexual orientation, gender role preferences, relationships with family and peers, and adjustment to life with a single parent. And essentially, they were all the same. Girls showed slight differences, including more flexibility in gender roles, which I don't see as a bad thing. Now, what about working mothers? We talked about this a little bit in attachment. So some of the effects. Nearly 3 out of 4 married mothers of children under 18 are employed. 4 out of 5 are divorced, separated, or widowed mothers. So if any of you were raised by a working mother, probably a lot of you were, there are some positive and negative effects of having a mother who's working. But despite sexist attitudes that the mother should stay in the home, maternal employment is actually connected with very few problems in children, and it's connected with more egalitarian attitudes in those children, which means they're more likely to view men and women as equal than if they had a mother who stayed at home. The negative effects with a working mother may be associated more with the lack of supervision rather than the maternal employment itself. So some very few negative effects have been found, but some positive effects were. For instance, increased family income has positive effects on child development to an extent. More income isn't always the answer. Maternal employment fosters greater independence and encourages greater responsibility and competence in the children. Sons and daughters show more egalitarian attitudes, which means they show less gender stereotyping and they're more likely to view men and women as equal. Children with employed mothers perceive their mothers as more competent. Parents who are both employed are more egalitarian in the distribution of their chores and breadwinning, and fathers tend to spend more time with their children. Working mothers tend to be less depressed and happier mothers, and that leads to better adjusted children. So here's another discussion I will post on Blackboard for you. So is a stay-at-home mom or a working mom better for children? I would appreciate your contributions to that. Divorced parents. Divorce used to be considered a non-normative influence, but sadly it is becoming more and more common. Nearly 40% of European American and 75% of African American children spend at least part of their childhood in a single parent family. So the effects of divorce. Children can lose financial stability. They move from a large house to a small apartment, move to a less desirable neighborhood, etc. They may spend more time at daycare, especially if the mother was stay at home and then has to return to work. And they get to spend less time with either parent, especially now as custody becomes more 50-50. Children of divorce are more likely to have conduct disorders, lower self-esteem, drug abuse, and poor grades. Physical health may decline temporarily. Effects are worse the first year after the breakup. Children of divorce are more likely to demonstrate lower social competence, behave aggressively, and so they have a harder time with their peers. In the US, boys seem to have a harder time with divorce than girls and take longer to recover. So are the effects temporary or long-term? Well, studies have shown that 3 years after divorce, feelings of sadness, shock, disbelief and desire for parental reunion decrease. So it takes 3 years for those feelings to start to wear off. 10 years later, however, anger toward the parent perceived as responsible for the divorce tends to remain. There are some confounding variables. So are all these effects due to divorce, or are they due to other things, such as parental conflict or inadequate parental problem-solving ability, changes in financial status, the age of the child when it happens, etc.? There are a lot of other variables at play. Children who hear parents fighting constantly may internalize blame. Young children are more likely to do so as a result of the way their brains work. If a child is suddenly spending less time with a parent, usually the father, or feels competition with a parent's new family, feelings of rejection and low self-esteem are likely. They may ask themselves, why doesn't daddy love me anymore? Or what's wrong with me? Divorce is also associated with a decline in parenting. I've already said single parents are more likely to be authoritarian than authoritative, which can lead to some of these negative effects. Families are less likely to eat meals together. They're less likely to have a set schedule for sleep, getting to school, etc. One study in 2000 looked at children in families of separated or divorced mothers and intact families. The children in the two-parent family showed fewer problematic behaviors, more social skills, higher IQ tests, and a more secure attachment to the mother. However, when the mother's level of education, SES, and psychological well-being were factored in, the differences between the two groups almost vanished. So there's a lot more at play than just the divorce itself. So what helps? These effects can be mitigated with sensitive, responsive parenting. Comes back to attachment. Support from the family can help, immediate and extended family. So the support of friends, maybe membership in a religious community, good communication among the family members, and financial security. A lot of the problems from divorce stem from the fact that the family suddenly has less income. So, should parents stay married for the sake of the children? Parental bickering, especially severe fighting, is linked to the same kinds of problems that children of divorce experience. Children exposed to marital conflict exhibit stress reactions and are likely to blame themselves. So it seems like the conflict is more to blame than the divorce itself. So blended families. Most children live with a single parent for about 5 years after the divorce, but more than 2/3 of men and women remarry eventually. Becoming part of a blended family does not automatically lead to adjustment problems. Children benefit from a warm and caring step-parent. It's usually a stepfather. If the step-parent brings in their own children, however, adjustment is harder. Preferential treatment of biological children over stepchildren can lead to resentment, conflict, and unhappiness. And the parent needs to take care to not let their enthusiasm and affection for their new spouse to interfere with their relationship with their children. We're going to switch gears a little bit to a lighter topic. Students typically enjoy talking about this, and I wish I could talk to you about it in class. I'll create a forum for it instead. Every family has its own set of traditions and routines. So a tradition are things that are done a certain way every time. They're usually involving holidays or annual events. A routine is a daily event or mundane task that happens the same way every time. Maybe you have a certain bedtime routine that you follow every day. These traditions and routines are different in every family. So think about how you celebrate a major holiday in your family. Is it the same as other families? Every family is unique. Some traditions are like inside jokes in the family, while some may be similar to other families. Some traditions and routines are multi-generational and may be engaged in simply because parents or grandparents did it that way without understanding why. So for those of you with children, think of things that you do with your children because it's what you did for your parents. And this is what I will create the forum about. I would like your own examples of your own traditions and routines that are special to you. So there's a reason for this. There's a reason you want to pass on the traditions you had as a kid to your children. The traditions and routines we engage in with our family bring the family together. They make the family more cohesive. Usually these traditions are associated with positive memories and emotions, making them nostalgic and comforting. The opposite can also be true, unfortunately. In those cases, people often make a conscious decision to do things differently than their parents did. The point is, traditions and routines are a huge part of every family, and if you spend some time thinking about it, you'll see many examples in your own family. These can vary culturally. They may be based on religion, culture, SES. Some are common between families because that's the way the culture celebrates them. Think about Thanksgiving in the United States. But there are variations within families. Religion may also change which holidays you celebrate or how you celebrate them. And religion can also influence your daily routines. So every culture has a different set of traditions and routines, but within that culture, every family is also unique. So now that we've talked about family systems as a whole, let's talk about the effects of culture. Culture affects child development. Every culture is different. This is the macro system in Bronfenbrenner's theory. The views and practices may vary widely based on the part of the world you're in, or even where you are within a state or even within a city. So some examples: co-sleeping. In the US, most babies and toddlers sleep alone, with the exception of about 20% of US Hispanic households. You've probably all heard the dangers of co-sleeping. We'll go more into this later, but in countries, 2/3 of the rest of the world co-sleeps with their children. And in these countries, children sleep in their bed with their parents. In Japan, for example, co-sleeping is the custom until a child reaches the age of 5. So this varies a lot by culture. Discipline. Some countries and cultures use very strict physical discipline, while others have outlawed it. We discussed already how cultural views can change the effects of spanking and other forms of punishment. But what is seen as acceptable in one country to discipline your children might be unacceptable in another. Gender roles. This one is huge. The way girls and boys are viewed and treated can be drastically different based on culture. I'm sure you can think of how this different treatment affects the development of boys and girls differently. So here's another discussion I will post. What ways can you think of that culture influences development? So finally, we are done with this topic. If you have any questions on it, please post them on the Blackboard forum.